Hello and welcome to Indus News, coming to you live from our studios in Lahore. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. We start from Saudi Arabia, which has called two emergency summits of the Gulf Cooperation Council and the Arab League. The meetings were called after a US aircraft carrier and B-52 bombers were sent to the Middle East amidst rising tensions with Iran. Adding to the escalating regional tensions, Saudi oil tankers were attacked in the UAE. Saudi King Salman bin Abdulaziz has summoned the Arab leadership to Makkah on May the 30th for the summits. Turkey has said it would jointly produce S-500 defense systems with Russia after the S-400's purchase. President Tayyip Erdogan said Turkey will sooner or later get F-35s from the US despite current objections by Washington. Meanwhile, in India, at least one person has been killed and several others injured during the final phase of India's month-long elections. Violence and technical glitches have marred polling in the country's West Bengal state. 59 constituencies are being contested across 7 states and 1 union territory during the 7th phase of polling. In another development, Israeli missiles have targeted Syria's southern Quneitra governorate for the second night in a row. War Monitor said Israeli fighter jets fired 3 missiles from the occupied Golan Heights, hitting the Syrian Army Brigade. And in football, Manchester City have crushed Watford by 6-0 in the FA Cup final at London's Wembley Stadium. City's Raheem Sterling scored a hat-trick in addition to goals from David Silva, Gabriel Jesus and Kevin De Bruyne. This victory has made Manchester City the first men's team in history to win the English domestic treble. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. We start from Saudi Arabia, which has called 2 emergency summits of the Gulf Cooperation Council and the Arab League. The meetings have been called to discuss the heightened tensions in the kingdom and the neighboring United Arab Emirates. This report has the details.
Regional tensions escalated after a US aircraft carrier and B-52 bombers were sent to the Middle East amidst rising tensions with Iran. Responding to last week's attacks on its oil tankers, Saudi ministry said it was trying to avoid conflict.
Saudi Arabia does not want a war in the region and is not seeking one, and will do its best to evade it. But at the same time, if the other party chooses war, then we will respond with all strength and all determination and will defend ourselves and our interests.
Saudi King Salman bin Abdulaziz has summoned the Arab leadership to Mecca on May 30th for the summits. Meanwhile, Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman and US State Secretary Mike Pompeo talked on the telephone. Salman discussed regional security and its global impact with the US Secretary of State.
Meanwhile, Iran's Revolutionary Guards head Major General Hossein Salami says that Tehran is not pursuing war. This comes a day after Foreign Minister Javad Zarif also ruled out possibility of an armed conflict in the region. Zarif said Tehran does not seek a confrontation with any country. The Iranian minister said people around the US president are pushing for war, but Donald Trump is against it. Tension between the two sides rose after US intensified economic sanctions on Iran. The Pentagon also bolstered its military presence in the Middle East. In a related development, China has asked Washington to show restraint and act with caution to avoid escalating tensions with Iran. China's top diplomat Wang Yi discussed the rapidly escalating situation with US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on the telephone. He told Pompeo the recent US actions in the Middle East had harmed China's interests. On trade war, Wang Yi said China is still willing to resolve differences through negotiations on an equal footing. He said Washington should not go too far in the current trade dispute between the two sides. Moving on, Turkey has said it would jointly produce S-500 defense systems with Russia after the S-400's purchase. President Tayyip Erdogan said the purchase of S-400 defense systems from Moscow is a done deal. Addressing a gathering in Istanbul, Erdogan confirmed that S-400s are expected to be delivered in July this year. He said Turkey will eventually get the F-35 warplanes from the US, despite current objections by Washington. Meanwhile, in India, at least one person has been killed and several others injured as violence marred the final phase of elections in West Bengal. The casualty occurred in a bomb attack in the West Bengal's Bengaluru city. Some 100 million voters are deciding the fate of 918 candidates. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also contesting in the final phase from northern city of Varanasi. Modi was elected from this constituency in the 2014 elections. Other key candidates include BJP's Ravi Shankar Prasad, Congress's Shatrughan Sinha and Manish Tiwari. Unprecedented security measures have been made in the eastern state of West Bengal, where clashes broke out earlier. The results will be announced on May the 23rd. For more on this, we are joined by our New Delhi correspondent, Bruce Harrison. Bruce, thank you for joining in. First of all, with the month-long polls now entering the final phase, how successful do you think has the Congress been in posing a challenge to the BJP government in these elections?
Well, compared to 2014, there's definitely much more tension heading into this final day of voting than we saw in the past. It seems there's a much stronger concerted effort from Congress and the alliance and its allies this time around. Enough so that the BJP, there is no clear-cut winner at this point like we saw in the past. It's not only Congress that's really trying to derail the BJP's momentum and keep Prime Minister Modi from taking a second term in office. A number of political parties, 21 to be exact, have formed various alliances solely with the goal of making sure the BJP can get the majority it needs, with coalition help perhaps, in Parliament in order to see Prime Minister Modi take a second five-year term. We can look specifically at his constituency of Varanasi, where it seems he's going to win handedly, as he did in 2014, but that's simply not the case for other members of the BJP throughout different constituencies voting today, whether it's in Uttar Pradesh or West Bengal. There are some serious contests taking place in those states. Enough question about whether the BJP will get the number of seats it wants, that it has really put a focus in certain areas that it didn't in 2014. West Bengal, I just mentioned, is a great example of that. They have put a lot more feet on the ground, enhanced their campaign efforts because of what you suggested. Is Congress making a run? Is there a potential that the BJP won't hold on to power as it did in 2014? Analysts suggest the BJP is going to at least need a coalition to put Modi in power for his second 5 years. But all signs do suggest at this time that will be the case, but a coalition will be necessary.
So, okay, as you have mentioned, that the regional parties are also vying for a significant role at the center. Is there any chance of a hung parliament? How many chances are there that there could be a hung parliament after the May 23rd results?
Well, I can tell you the Election Commission would not be pleased with that, because if that's the case, it requires an entire new election. It wouldn't be the first time it's happened in India. I believe about 2 decades ago that was the case, and that they weren't able to form a government within Parliament, and that requires the country to vote once again. from what I've learned from analysts here in New Delhi and the country, and just getting a sense of what's taken place over this massive election, it doesn't seem that that's a likely outcome at this time. You're right, I did mention previously about these opposition alliances that are really trying to dethrone Modi and the BJP, but based on what we're hearing, they may not quite have the edge to do that, which wouldn't allow for a hung parliament. The biggest storyline right now is the suggestion is that the BJP will be able to squeak by, but it will definitely take coalition help to form the government within parliament.
Okay, Bruce, India has been building an nationalist narrative over the past decades. Considering the narratives and issues, have these elections united the Indian polity or created more polarization?
I think you can just reference what I was saying in regards to how the BJP is facing a much greater challenge than it did in 2014. And we know that part of the Modi wave back then was based upon just a desire for change, perhaps seeking a candidate that's the everyday man, compared to the dynastic rule we saw with the Gandhi family for years and years. But also, right now, we could perhaps base some of the pressure on the BJP on what you're suggesting, that this nationalist narrative maybe is turning off a certain segment of voters. At the same time, we are seeing plenty of people rally behind the Prime Minister for the actions he's taken at the border with Pakistan regarding the Air Force skirmish that took place there. There is a great concern among certain minorities here as well, religious minorities as well as those within the castes and others, that Modi is creating an environment perhaps where they are less than welcome. So there's suggestions that Congress could take those votes. Congress is more of an appealing party, and its opposition allies as well. But it's hard to say precisely that he's dividing this country because of this nationalist narrative. But there is strong suggestions that voters may turn to the other side because of that.
Thank you, Bruce Heitz, for updating with the latest developments as India votes for the 7th and the final phase of the general elections. Moving on, Germany has discussed the possibilities of peaceful political settlement in Afghanistan with Taliban leaders in Doha. A German delegation led by Special Envoy for Afghanistan, Marcus Potzel, met Taliban leader Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar. Taliban's political spokesperson Sohail Shaheen said Potzel assured Germany's positive role for peace in Afghanistan. The 6th round of US-Taliban talks ended on May the 9th with some progress on foreign troops' withdrawal from Afghanistan. In another development, Australian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz has called for a snap election showing the Vice-Chancellor's resignation. Meanwhile, the opposition has also conceded that the snap election bill will not be opposed in the parliament. More in this report.
With the EU elections just a week away, the Austrian coalition government witnessed a major fallout. Following the release of a controversial video, the far-right Freedom Party's Heinz-Christian Strache resigned. The leaked footage showed him discussing state contracts with a potential Russian backer to get political support. Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz pulled the plug on coalition and called for a snap election. Thousands of protesters gathered outside the Chancellor's office as the country's government collapsed.
The main task now is to restore the trust in our institutions from both the inside and the outside. In this case, this can only be done through new elections, and I promise you that I will closely observe this process.
Opposition leader Pamela Rendi-Wagner has said the snap election bill will not be opposed in the parliament.
In Britain, Prime Minister Theresa May has planned to make a big, bold offer to parliamentary members in a fourth bid to see her Brexit deal through the parliament. May has promised improved new measures. During an interview, May hinted at improving provisions on customs arrangements with the EU, among other propositions. She will consult her cabinet colleagues on the proposed changes to EU divorce deal. The cabinet will also consider a series of indicative votes to establish which proposals can command a majority. The Prime Minister is hoping to win cross-party support for her thrice-rejected legislation. May's last-gasp move follows the collapse of talks with Labour Party aimed at finding a way to deliver Brexit. In Australia, the ruling Liberal National Coalition has won the federal election. Opposition Labour Party conceded defeat and congratulated Prime Minister Scott Morrison. For more on this, we have been joined by our Brisbane correspondent, Richard Bruinsma. Richard, thank you for joining in. First of all the pre-poll surveys were predicting that Scott Morrison would lose. How did this exactly happen?
Well, this is one of those $60 million questions where all the opinion polls, even the opinion polls that were taken as the voters were leaving right on the last day of voting yesterday, even those opinion polls were even suggesting that the gap was even widening further. So for Scott Morrison and the LNP to retain government is, in Mr Morrison's own words, an absolute miracle. So tonight there would be many people in mourning in Australia, those of the Australian Labor Party, and in the Liberal Party there'll be some wild celebrations, I think, still continuing as to how they actually pulled off this miracle. So Mr Morrison, all through the campaign, maintained a strong focus on saying that the LNP was the best party to to improve the economy. And meantime, Labor had gone from message to message to message, and that's one of the arguments that people believe that maybe brought Mr Morrison across the line for another win. That he had just a very clear, simple message about the economy, and that the LNP was the best party to lead and improve Australia in that manner.
Well, Richard, what does this surprise defeat mean for Bill Shorten, his party, and what's exactly next for them?
Well, Mr Shorten last night, when it was becoming clear that Labor was not going to win, as all the polls suggested, Mr Shorten did last night say that he would be stepping down from the leadership. So now the Labor Party is in that process over the coming weeks of coming up with a new leader to lead the party over at least the next 3-year term. So. Obviously, he was very disappointed because he thought he was in there, and there were a lot of people in the party that were, I guess, contemplating their new roles as ministers rather than being on the opposition benches. But now all those plans have obviously been dashed, and they will spend another 3 years on the opposition benches, while Mr Morrison has a renewed power and a renewed mandate to lead as he wishes.
Thank you for updating regarding the latest post-election scenario in Australia. The Brisbane correspondent Richard Bruinsma was updating regarding that. Moving on with the further stories, former US Vice President Joe Biden has formally launched his campaign for the 2020 presidential election. Biden has entered the already crowded Democratic presidential field for the party's nomination. Addressing a rally in Philadelphia, Biden called for unity across the country against President Donald Trump. In his third bid for the Democratic nomination, Biden has said his single-point agenda is to beat Trump.
As long as Donald Trump's in the White House, none of these things, these critical things, are going to get done. So if you want to know what the first and most important plank in my climate proposal is, beat Trump. Beat Trump. Beat Trump.
In Latin America, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has said that talks in Norway were aimed at building a peaceful agenda with the opposition. Norway's foreign ministry said that the dialogue was in an exploratory phase. Details in this report.
A power struggle between President Nicolás Maduro and opposition leader Juan Guaido began in January. Guaido, backed by the US and many Latin American governments, has called for a military coup against Maduro since last month. but the government contained the situation. Reports of a meeting between the two sides in Norway's capital Oslo emerged on Thursday. Guaido confirmed he sent an envoy to Norway.
There is no negotiation. Again, I repeat it and I say it clear. This is an effort of Norway in a mediation that, by the way, has been going on for months.
But he denied that talks had been held with Maduro's delegation. Maduro said his representatives went to Norway to seek a peaceful agenda for the country. He thanked Norway for his mediation efforts to build a dialogue with the Venezuelan opposition.
Meanwhile, Venezuelans wait for hours for fuel as a shortage has worsened. Long queues at gas stations have reappeared due to plunging oil supply. Venezuelans are already struggling with hyperinflation and widespread shortages of basic goods amid a 5-year recession. Fuel shortages worsened following a plunge in gasoline supply and halt to work at the nation's second-largest oil refinery. Motorists waiting for fuel said the government needed to do more to tackle the problems. Tough U.S. sanctions have slashed crude oil exports and left President Maduro's government struggling to import fuel. Moving on, at least 5 people, including a pilot, have died after a private plane crashed near the Atlantic coast in Honduras. The aircraft was heading to the tourist port city of Trujillo. It crashed shortly after taking off from the Roatan Island on the Atlantic shoreline. The cause of the accident has not yet been determined. Army officials say the dead include 4 U.S. citizens, while the 5th victim's nationality is still unknown. All dead bodies have been recovered from the wreckage. France's anti-government Yellow Vest protests have marked 6 months. The protest against fuel hike has spiraled into a revolt against President Emmanuel Macron's policies. Details follow. In Sudan, the military has decided to resume negotiations with protest leaders following a 72-hour suspension. The deputy leader of the Sudan's military council has confirmed resumption of talks with the protest leaders. Negotiations over government body makeup expected earlier this week were suspended by the military council. At least 4 people were killed and a dozen injured in clashes in Khartoum following the suspension of talks. ExxonMobil has evacuated all foreign staff from the West Kurma 1 oil field in Iraq. The petroleum titan cited escalating tensions between Iran and the US as the reason for its move. 60 foreign ExxonMobil employees have been flown to Dubai from Iraq as US-Iran relations continue to deteriorate. The evacuation comes days after the US withdrew all non-essential staff from its Baghdad embassy. Iraq hosts over 5,000 US troops and shares 1,458-kilometer border with Iran. Meanwhile, Iraqi engineers continue to ensure that production is not affected. The oil fields continue to produce 440,000 barrels of oil per day. ExxonMobil said it is capable of ensuring the safety of workers who remain at the oil field. 2 guards and a soldier have been killed in a suspected ISIS attack on Libya's southwestern Zella oil field. A security official said the assailants also kidnapped 4 people while fleeing. The Zella field produces 19,000 barrels of oil per day on average. Meanwhile, Libya's National Oil Corporation chief said continued instability could cause loss of 95% of oil production. In Somalia, drought has left nearly 2 million people starved. Less rainfall is also pushing the communities to the brink across East Africa. Details follow.
Somalia is enduring its third driest season since 1981. Thousands of children are also facing malnutrition in the arid, conflict-torn nation. The Norwegian Refugee Council said millions have abandoned their homes in search for food. Last week, 44,000 Somalis left their homes in rural areas, raising the number of internally displaced people to 2.6 million.
We left our home and farms because of drought-related conditions and fighting affected us. Our farms were hit badly by drought conditions. Thanks to Allah, now we live in the Shingani district.
The United Nations estimates that 1.7 million people are living without food, and this figure is expected to grow in near future. A UN official said nearly 1 million children will need treatment for malnutrition in 2019.
The situation in Somalia is very worrying. We're just 2 years on from the 2017 drought, which had a famine warning to it. We were able to avoid famine through working with partners, government, civil society, the diaspora, private sector. It really was a collective effort.
The hunger crisis may extend beyond Somalia, putting the entire Horn of Africa region at risk from drought and extreme weather.
North Korea has asked the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres to address seizure of its ship by the US. North Korea's ambassador to the United Nations said the action indicates that the United States does not care about international laws. In a letter, the ambassador called for urgent measures by the UN chief. The diplomat said Washington has infringed North Korea's sovereignty and violated the United Nations Charter. A 4-day Chilam Joshi festival is being celebrated in the Kailash Valley to welcome spring. The annual festival takes place in the Rumbor, Bumbarati and Bibir valleys of northern Pakistan. The Chilam Joshi festival began by sprinkling milk on the deity and leaving it as an offering. To mark the event, the Kailash people wear traditional clothes and decorate their houses. Elders of the Kailash community also perform rituals in Bumbarati Valley. The Chilam Joshi festival attracted a large number of tourists from the country and abroad. A look into the world of sports now. Manchester City have crushed Watford by 6-0 in the FA Cup final at the London's Wembley Stadium. Raheem Sterling and Gabriel Jesus both scored twice in addition to goals from David Silva and Kevin De Bruyne. Sterling's quick-fire goals came in the last 10 minutes of the match. City ended their 61-game season with 169 goals, beating their own previous best of 156. This victory has made Manchester City the first men's team in history to win the English domestic treble. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For further updates, details and live streaming, log on to our website, that is indus.news. Thank you for watching.